At 66, when most people are thinking about slowing down, Eamonn Holmes found himself standing in the middle of a silence, louder than any TV studio he'd ever worked in. The cameras were off, the lights were gone, and for the first time in decades, the man known for filling the airwaves had nothing to say. Or so it seemed, because when he finally spoke about Ruth Langsford, the words didn't land gently. They landed heavy, and they left a question hanging that no one was prepared for. How does a love story end when the whole world thought it was unbreakable? For years, Eamonn and Ruth were television's steady heartbeat. Morning after morning, living rooms across Britain woke up to their familiar banter, their laughter, the way they instinctively leaned toward each other without thinking. It looked effortless. Too effortless. Behind the scenes, though, the story was far more complicated. Friends describe a house that slowly grew quieter. Not from shouting or drama, but from something more distance. The kind that creeps in silently, one unspoken compromise at a time. Eamonn had built his life on being heard. His voice carried weight, authority, warmth, but aging, health struggles, and time began to change the balance. There were days he couldn't move the way he used to. Days when pain replaced confidence, and somewhere in that shift, something fragile cracked. Ruth, always composed on screen, was fighting her own quiet battles. Two people sharing a life, yet slowly orbiting different emotional worlds. Those close to them noticed the change before the headlines did. Less shared laughter, off-camera longer, pauses, conversations that stayed strictly professional. Viewers sensed it too, even if they couldn't explain why. Was it just exhaustion? Or was something deeper unraveling right in front of everyone's eyes? Then came the moment no one expected. At 66, Eamonn finally broke his silence. Not with anger, not with tears, but with a raw honesty that felt almost uncomfortable to hear. He spoke about loneliness, not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being next to someone who no longer sees you the same way. He hinted at feeling left behind, at watching a shared life slowly turn into parallel paths, and it was bad. Not because of insults or accusations, but because of what was missing. Hope. In his words, there was no promise of reconciliation, no softening nostalgia, just acceptance. The kind that comes after long nights of reflection, when you realize the story you were living is already over. Even if the world hasn't caught up yet, imagine sitting in a familiar kitchen, every object holding a memory, and realizing those memories no longer belong to the present. That's the image Eamonn's silence painted. A man surrounded by decades of shared history, yet confronting the reality that history doesn't guarantee a future. How do you grieve a relationship that's still technically there? How do you let go when there's no dramatic ending? Only a slow fade. Ruth, for her part, remained largely quiet. And that quiet spoke volumes. Two public figures, both skilled communicators, choosing restraint over spectacle. Was it dignity, protection, or was it simply too painful to put into words? The unanswered questions only fueled the mystery. What really happens when the cameras stop rolling? Who are they when no one is watching? Eamonn's words carried the weight of a man looking back, not just at a marriage, but at a lifetime. At 66, you don't just reflect on love, you reflect on legacy, on whether the sacrifices were worth it, on whether being strong for so long meant ignoring cracks that eventually became impossible to fix. His silence before now feels almost symbolic, like he was waiting until he was strong enough to admit the truth, even if that truth hurt. And here's the twist no one expected. There was no villain in his story, no explosive betrayal, just two people changing, slowly, painfully, and publicly. It forces an uncomfortable question onto all of us. If love can quietly slip away even after decades, what does that say about the relationships we take for granted? Are we really seeing the people beside us, or just the roles they play? As the dust settles, one thing is clear. This wasn't just the end of a television partnership. It was the closing of a chapter that millions felt emotionally invested in. And maybe that's why Eamonn's words hit so hard, because they remind us that even the most familiar love stories can end without warning, without drama, and without a neat resolution. So what happens next? Does healing come with time, or does it come with acceptance? Is silence sometimes the loudest truth of all? And when the world moves on to the next headline, what remains for the people left living with the aftermath? At 66, Eamonn Holmes didn't just break his silence. He shattered an illusion. And in doing so, he left us with a haunting reminder. Love isn't defined by how it begins, but by how honestly we face its ending.